Monday is the first Monday of September, so our women's group for September will be on the second Monday, which is September 14th. This week coming up, Tuesday, we have Grief Share with Diane, and that's at 6:30 to 8:30 here in the church. Thursday, we have Bible study at 7 o'clock here in the church, and we are still going through this series, The Chosen. And it's awesome, and you can still access it through Zoom. And then Friday, September 25th, mark your calendars because our third prayer circle is that day, and that's going to be at 7 o'clock. So thank you. Now we can dismiss the kids.
Okay, guys, go have fun. As soon as all the kids are away, we're going to hand out the M&Ms. Shh, they didn't hear that, did they? So, do I have to hit anything extra? I don't want to say anything. What? Yeah. Okay. Nothing else other than that? Okay. Honey, if you're not paying attention, I might as well go home. No one's going to pay attention if you're not paying attention. So I don't know whether or not you guys heard the news, but 6 EF seniors tested positive for COVID. Apparently some coach they brought in to teach a cheerleading class or something had it. And so it's been passed on as that will happen. Marissa Manco was near somebody who was near somebody, kind of a thing. I doubt very much that Marissa has it. Marissa doubts very much that she has it, but the Mancos are staying home today just to be on the safe side. We've been asked a lot about what our policy is, and I've been watching the COVID map. And hey, Allegheny County recently released, I got to get into this, all their data is spreadsheets. So now I got to do my geek thing and make my own spreadsheet because there's things they don't post, like they're always giving us a total scoreboard how many cases, but that's not how many cases are now. That's like since the beginning of time, and so that scoreboard's always going up. So I kind of interested in other things, but so we're monitoring it. We're being cautiously positive about this, and that's our policy. We tell you if we think like Marissa's possibly been exposed, no one really believes she is, but she's going to stay home to be safe. That's a smart thing to do. If you want to wear a mask, if you think maybe that's a smart thing to do, we're not going to do any kind of mandatory masking or anything like that until we see a higher percentage in Elizabeth Township than we see today, which last I checked wasn't even 1%. So that's kind of the policy. We have to see a higher percentage than that. And so right now your chances are very little, and so we're not trying to be foolish, but we're also not trying to live by fear. So anyway, that's kind of the policy of the church. I don't know if I ever really officially say that, but be aware, and if you think you may have been exposed, be gracious to everybody else and stay home and watch it online. And if you don't, please come, because everybody here is having fun. So that's that. The only thing I want to add is The Chosen. You guys, I don't know, who's seen The Chosen? Because it's been around for a little while. Y'all see it? It's a lot better than I thought it'd be. Usually I cringe when I watch these movies made, but this guy who makes it, Dallas, I can't remember his last name ever, but he's really a very sincere individual. He's done a lot of prayer on this, and he's a sincere Christian. He's evangelical. I pity him though, because he's also trying to walk the line with this. He's an evangelical, but he wants to make this also acceptable to the Roman Catholic Church, the Messianic Jews, and even somewhat the Mormons, because we need everybody together in order to support things like this in order to make it profitable and possible. So he's trying not to make anybody angry, but he's trying to stay strict to the Scripture, which is going to make everybody angry. And so it's like he's kind of doing a really good job on that, I think. And again, The Chosen is a look at the people that Jesus influenced and changed, and looking at Jesus through their eyes. He wants to do 8 seasons, which is incredible. They've got almost the second season. This has all been funded by people like us. The church has put forth some of it to fund them as well. We actually believe in this project now. And last week was fun. It was Jesus with kids. It was really a fun episode, and it was fun to watch some of that. So anyway, it's good. He takes imagination, but not when it comes to Scripture. When he gets to actual Scriptures, it's almost word for word. But then some of the other things, some of the details, that the scripture doesn't talk about. He's consulted, Jewish historians and try to make it accurate, but they've let their imagination run wild in places. Peter gets into fist fights, things like that. But it's pretty cool, I think. So join us if you can. Zoom in. We've got that. We got the kinks worked out of that. We're zooming that and streaming that well now. So that's good. Anything else? Well, yeah, I'm going to get to that right now. Okay, so she wants her prize. Okay, so last week I said that this week we're going to start a brand new series, and the title of this series is For Crying Out Loud. And I said, I'm not going to tell you what the series is about. I'm going to let everybody guess. And I said, if anybody guesses correctly, I'd give them M&Ms. And so I have M&Ms with me today. And I got to tell you, there were very few people who even guessed. I'm looking around here. I think I have Jared guessed. He texted me. Emily guessed. Victoria guessed. Correct me if I'm wrong, no one else guessed. I didn't get a guess from any of you. No one likes to play games. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Only Victoria got it right. So I almost want to disqualify her. And I should disqualify her anyway because she doesn't like M&Ms. But so I'm going to give consolation prizes to everybody who played the game because not enough people. I'm going to encourage, by having them eat M&Ms in front of you, I'm going to encourage more participation the next time around. So, Victoria, plain or M&M? Or peanut? What? Plain. Okay. She got it right. Jared, plain or peanut? Peanut. You're a peanut guy? All right. Emily, plain or peanut? Okay. Trick or treat's over. Here you go. Oh, what? You said peanut? Oh, I said plain. Okay. You're my own daughter. It's like I don't even know you. All right, so the series Crying Out Loud, For Crying Out Loud, is based on the book of Psalms. I think we had prayer, and what'd you say again, Jared? Prayer, yeah. Which wasn't a bad guess, prayer. And you could even say, well, Psalms means prayer. It actually doesn't. Psalms means worship. Actually, the Psalms comes from a Greek word that means songs, literally. And for the longest time, they didn't know what to call the book of the Bible, Psalms. It kind of got its name later. Hang on just a second. Just ignore me for a moment. So they got that. The Greeks called it Psalms finally. It's the longest book of the Bible to write. They believe it took about 900 years to write the book of Psalms. From the first Psalm to the last Psalm. There's 150 of them, and 75 of them were written by David. 50 of them, David is crying out to the Lord. So that's where it gets its name. It's if you read the Psalms and you go through it, you'll see David was not shy about calling out to God. I mean, he let it rip. He said some things to God that I wouldn't have said, especially when it came to his enemies. He was very clear on what he wanted God to do to his enemies. He wanted them to break their bones and grind them to dust and all kind of things. Like, wow, this is uncomfortable. But so he was a warrior, though, so give him a little grace there. I have said things to God in my prayer life. I've said many times, the reason I'm still alive and walking the earth proves that God's a merciful God. Some of the things I said to him in my prayer life, crying out to God is not something he shies away from. And I get a little frustrated sometimes when people go through these times in their lives and they're telling me, I'll get back to church when I'm through this. Like, kind of when you should be here. Right? God wants you there now. He wants you through. He doesn't want you going off on your own. I'll fix this and come back. And when God says, I can fix it better if you just come to me now. And so many times we run away and we kind of sulk. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this series was I wanted to do a sermon on Psalm 1. And the reason I wanted to do a sermon on Psalm 1 was this. Many of you know I'm a preacher's kid. My dad was a pastor here in the area for many years. And shortly, maybe 2 years before we started Spirit Chapel, I had an opportunity to preach at the church I was going to at the time. We had no idea this was going to happen. I was just a pew sitter like you guys, seat sitters. We didn't have seats, we had pews. But that's all I was, just sitting there at Mount Vernon Presbyterian Church. And the preacher went on a sabbatical, and they had all kind of slots they had to fill. And to save money, instead of hiring somebody to come in and preach, they asked some of the people from the congregation to pick up a sermon. And I'd preached before many, many years before, so I'll do it. And so I thought it was kind of neat, though, because my father had been a pastor there 40 years ago. And in fact, it's the first church I remember. I was a baby when I was born in McKeesport Hospital, but that was the church he was the pastor of at that time. And so I thought it was kind of neat that I was going to preach in a church my father had pastored for, I don't know how many years he was there, 6 or 7. And so I called him. Now, my father at the time was living in an assisted living care, or unassisted technically. His health was failing, but more than anything, his mind was coming and going at times, And so I never knew exactly who I was going to get, but he was still sharper back then. And when I called him, I told him, what I was doing, and he was, of course, excited to hear that. And I said, do you remember the first time you preached at Mount Vernon Church? He goes, I kind of remember it. And he said, I'm sure I preached on Psalm 1. I thought, wow, what a memory to pull out from 40 years ago. That, in fact, it went over 40 years ago for the first time he preached there. I said, Psalm 1. How do you know you preached Psalm 1? He said, because I always preach Psalm 1 for my tryout sermons, my auditions. And so I'm sure I would have done that. I thought, well, that's neat, And then, I'd go on and preach. And then a year or so later, we were starting to contemplate starting Spirit Chapel when it occurred to me, it's easy to come up with one sermon. It's hard to come up with a sermon every week. I thought, man, I need ideas for sermons. I thought, what about that Psalm 1 sermon my dad preached? That'd be a good one. And so I called him up and I asked him about that. I said, do you remember what your points were? Now, my dad was a classically trained Presbyterian minister, so it was always 3 points. You had 3 points to a sermon. Do you remember what your 3 points were to the sermon? And he had no idea what I was talking about. It was like one of those off days. And he said, no, I'm sorry, son, I didn't even know. He said, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure I told you I preached Psalm 1, and I'm sure I did, but I don't remember anything about it. And darn, I'll have to ask him later. But actually, we opened November of 2013, and my father passed away December of 2013. So I never got a chance to find out what he preached when he preached Psalm 1. And so I went to look at it. This is like, again, shortly after we opened. I thought, well, I'll preach it. I can figure this out. I don't need my dad to help me on this one. I'll figure it out. And I opened the book. It's 6 verses, folks. 6 verses. Like, how do you get a 20-minute sermon? And my dad preached 20-minute sermons, not like me. I go on forever. But how do you do 20 minutes on 6 verses? How do you do that? I can't do this. This is clearly a professional text. I can't handle this one. But as got older, got a little more comfortable up here, I thought, I'm going to go back to Psalm 1 and see if maybe somehow I can glean out enough information to eke out 20 minutes for you all today. And I got to warn you, there's so much in Psalm 1, I almost split this into 2 sermons. I'm not kidding. This is amazing how your perspective changes. So I'm going to just read it to you. I'm going to read all 6 verses, and I'm going to show you what I think my dad preached, and I'm going to take off from there. Okay, here we go. Blessed is the man. Sometimes, you the King James guy, blessed. But blessed, he's going to be blessed. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. But the ungodly, they're not so. They are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteousness. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, and the way of the ungodly shall perish. Now I just want to say, because I'm not going to come back to this verse today, but the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment. That doesn't mean they won't be judged. That means they don't have the right to stand in front of God's judgment, is what that means. Okay, so I'm pretty sure the 3 points my dad would have pulled out, I don't know, would have been something like this. Here's what to avoid, here's what to do, and here's what the result is. It's a nice 3-point sermon. It kind of breaks up that way. Not where I'm going, but that would have been a good way of going. I want to talk about the word choices of the psalmist, because the ideas are easy to grasp, but the way he expresses them I find unique. And I jump through, if you go to BibleGateway.com, usually where I go when I grab these verses and bring. And usually I stick either with a New King James Version or an NASB version. Some people ask sometimes, because both of those attempt to be word-for-word translations. And if I'm going to drill down, I'd like to as close to word-for-word as I could get. But sometimes just to read it, I'll go to the Living Bible just to read stuff sometimes, or a New International Reader's Version. That's a real easy one to read. So if you're just kind of trying to read to get the sense of things, I'll go there. That's what I love about Bible Gateway. You can flip between them, But it was amazing to me how the words changed when you went to different translations. So that took me back to my other favorite spot on the internet, blueletterbible.org, which you can break down into the etymology. I can look at the Hebrew word that this came from. It's really kind of a great resource for pastors like me that are bivocational, which is Latin for never sleeps. But anyway, but this is actually from the New King James Version, and this is pretty much, I think, as close to word for word as you can get. But I want you to walk not in the counsel of the ungodly. Walk not in the counsel of the ungodly. Now, sometimes some translations said advice. And some translation says, do not seek the advice of sinners. That's how they translated this. And that's an interesting approach, but I don't think that's really what the psalmist is saying. He's picking up a verb here, walk. Walk not in the counsel of the ungodly. Now, it's kind of tough to say, hey, don't ever seek the advice of sinners. Because sinners know a lot of stuff, you know. It's like, it's like I'm going to go to buy a car, you know. My mechanic tells me, and this didn't happen, by the way. But he says, hey, whatever you do, stay away from Buicks. You know, I hate Buicks. Buicks are horrible cars. I don't know if that's true. I'm just simply illustration. You know, so my mechanic, who's not a godly man, but knows engines, tells me, stay away from Buick. But I call up my mom, and she had this Buick LeSabre she just loved growing up, you know. I still miss that Buick LeSabre, greatest car ever. So I have a sinner telling me, don't buy Buick. And I have a godly woman, my mother, saying, oh, Buick's the greatest thing in the world. Whose advice should I take? I'm taking the mechanic's advice, you know, about cars, especially today. I'm doing that. When they're saying don't look for the counsel of sinners, they're not saying, I don't know, should I buy an iPhone or an Android? I must go to a righteous man and ask. That's not what he's saying. When he uses the word that gets translated here, counsel, he's talking about life-defining decisions. That's why he puts the walk with it. These are the kind of choices that will modify your life. This is what's going to determine your direction in your life. These are more things like, who should I marry? Should I marry? When should I have kids? Should I have kids? How many kids? Right? These are decisions that change your life. Where should I go to school? What job should I have? Where should I live? What house should I buy? These are life-defining decisions. And what he's saying is, you don't want to go to sinners for that. And the reason you don't want to go to sinners for that is because their perspective is different on things than yours are, right? You shouldn't live according to the advice of those who don't serve God, because they will give you the wrong advice. They can't help themselves. They're motivated by things that you should not be motivated by. And Jesus tells us this. He tells us that we always have to focus on the correct way of looking at things. Here's a proverb for you. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Looks good. Looks like that should be what I do. And I go to get advice, and they say, oh, here's what you should do. And, oh, yes, I'll do that. And it looks good to me, but it leads to death. And this is this. I'm sorry, I'm going to do this. This is going to really bug you guys, but this is banging off of me, and it's ticking. There, that's better. Anyway, we'll edit that out, right, Em? You're going to edit that out? Oh, no, we're going live. We can't edit things anymore. But it looks good. It looks right. And you look at it and say, this makes total sense to me. But God says, no, that way leads to death. How in the world do you avoid that? How can we get to the point where we avoid this kind of stuff? Because that's what I want to know. Well, one of the ways you do it is you talk to people who have a perspective of God on things. And you seek their counsel. And you walk in their way. I told a story last night when we were moving from Texas to Virginia. I'm switching jobs. And it seemed like that was the right thing to do, and so we did it. And I got to be honest with you, I wasn't exceptionally righteous in those days. I believed, we went to church. That's about as far as I went. But there was a pastor in Texas I had come to get to know a little bit. And I told him, well, I won't be seeing anymore because we're going to be moving to Virginia. And he says, oh, that's great. Where? And I told him the D.C. area. He said, I know about 3 really great churches there. Let me get you their addresses now while you're looking. So I'm not looking for a church yet. I still going to find a house. He goes, well, that's why I'm giving you the church address, so you know where to get your we that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. Wait. You're telling me that I should pick my church first and then my house? That's not how it's done. We have a real estate agent here. That's not how anybody looks, right? No one comes and says, well, where's the churches? They'll ask that question after they've asked the question about the school district. After they ask a question about crime, right? After they've driven around the neighborhood, try to picture themselves being there. No one picks their house based on a pastor. Now, when I was a kid, I did, because my dad was the pastor. We lived in the church parsonage most of my life, so that was kind of chosen. My dad was a professional Christian. I had no choice. But, normal people don't do that. And I thanked him, and I took the addresses, and I put them in some folder somewhere I never looked at again, because we had to pick a house based on other things, like closeness to work. But what he was saying was actually, you're going to move to a new place, and that new place is going to determine the direction of your life with God. Don't you want to lock that down first It was the weirdest thing I'd ever heard. But since then, since I've grown up a little bit from then, I understand my pastor friend absolutely had it right. But the world's advice will always make sense to you if what you want to do is succeed in the world. And if you don't, you need to find somebody who has proper counsel. Now, I told a very long story about this last night, and I was praying about that this morning, and I'm going a different direction today. I don't know if you guys like this or don't like this, but I'm going to read you a poem today that I think describes this perfectly. And for those of you who like poetry, you're going to love this. If you're like my wife and you hate poetry, buckle up, baby. She's like already, I don't like this. But here's a poem written by one of my favorite poets, a guy named Waddy Mitchell, who was an American cowboy, old school, real cowboy. And I don't know if you guys knew this, but there's this thing called cowboy poetry, because when they're out there, especially before the event of cell phones and stuff, they had no entertainment. So they'd sit around and tell stories around the campfire. And what you found out was if you've heard the story before, you can listen to like maybe once or twice, and then you're done. But if you make a rhyme out of it, it was interesting enough that people would listen to it again. In fact, sometimes they'd request it because they're trying to remember it themselves, right? So cowboy poetry is a thing. They actually have a contest up in Nevada every year about it. And Waddy Mitchell was one of my favorite cowboy poets. I've discovered him when I was in Texas. And he, in this poem, asks advice out of somebody who he thinks he knows what advice he's going to get, because this guy had chosen the path he wanted to go. So this is the poem. Not so terribly well, I said in answer to his question. I'm running fast, but wondering if it's in the wrong direction. My wife has started gaining weight, and gray shows in her hair. Her existence seems to be in running kids from here to there. How many people right now are identifying? My job has lost its challenge. It seems it never changes. Sometimes I'd like to chuck it all and leave to ride new ranges. I thought my friend would understand. He'd walked the same old road, and he'd made decisions in his life to drop his heavy load. So I laid my troubles on him, and I told him how I felt, and he just stared at me all hollow, like he's been hit below the belt. He sits down close, all weak-like. He looks me in the eye. His hands, they started trembling. I believe he's going to cry. He swallows hard and tells me, I know what you're up against. It happens at this time of life. You feel like you've been fenced. Some like life becomes routine. Seems like life is coming routine. It all just feels the same. So you go to hunting witches, looking for someone else to blame. Our working wife scapegoat real well when we're of that mind, and little faults become big because that's what we want to find. Please don't make my same mistakes, and let a notion be your guide. The grass ain't greener. I see that now. I'm on the other side. I upturned several lives with my leaving, plus my own, and lost my common little family in my routine little home. I'd have never left it if I'd taken time to figure out that what I wanted out of is what life is all about. We're seldom taught that, though. It seems almost out of style. If I could just have one more chance, I'd like that extra mile. But that can't be. Now I must lie upon the bed I've made, while my will to carry on like bad memories starts to fade. And if you never take advice again, please heed these words, my friend. The purpose of life's race is in the running to the end. There will be times it seems so far we fear we'll never make it. We tire and lose sight of dreams and want to just forsake it. It's still all on your mind right now, but thought precedes the act. And it isn't yet too late, my friend. I know that for a fact. You started your race gamely. You've just been bumped against the rail. I'm not saying you sold your saddle, but you've put it up for sale. This is what happens, right? And we go seek the advice of the people who are going to tell us what we want to hear. We walk in the counsel of the ungodly. Very few friends, when we go and we start complaining about our life, say, well, you better buck up and get your life together, because you're all wrong here. Friends agree with you. That's why they're friends, People don't agree with you. Unfriend them on Facebook and stop talking to them. I want people to, we live in this echo chamber. And that's what the psalmist is warning us about. You're going to gather yourselves around ungodly people, and that's a bad echo to hear, because you're not hearing the echo of the Holy Spirit. You're hearing the echo of the world, and the world is run by mammon. Jesus says this. He says in Luke, look, no servant can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, Jesus said mammon. Obviously, this, in your translations, it might say money. But Jesus said mammon. Now, mammon can be translated money, but that's actually not an accurate translation. A better translation for mammon is greed, avarice. It's the god of this world that gets us to want more, always, always, always wanting more. Mammon, some believe, was actually a god that was worshipped in the Roman times. It's like Gordon Gekko said.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit.
Greed is not good. But greed is what the world teaches us. Grab everything you can. Make it work for you. Right? This is what we're taught. If you've got a dream, you can make it happen. That's like the American way. But what about God? What about God's ideas for you? That's what the psalmist is warning us against. He says, you can't do that. If you start seeking the counsel of the ungodly, they're going to lead you on ungodly ways. They can't help it. And then he says this, which is a weird thing. He says, don't walk in the path, or don't walk in the way of the ungodly counsel. And then he says, don't stand in the path of sinners. I would have put those the other way around. Stand in the path of sinners makes it sound like you're trying to stop them. You're like, oh, no, stop. That's not what he's saying here. Here's what he's talking about. He's talking about you are listening to ungodly counsel. It has led you in the middle where you're standing right here and you're watching the sinners go by you. And you're watching where they're going longingly. Don't stand in the path of sinners. You won't stand long, by the way. You'll join the parade. That's what he's warning us about. He's saying, don't stand in the path of sinners, because the sinners are going to sweep you along. You will not resist them. They will sweep you along. A lot of people seem to think, well, I've got a lot of ungodly friends, but I'm a witness to them. No, you're not. Almost assuredly you're not. In fact, Paul warns us, don't be deceived. He says, bad company corrupts good morals. I'm not saying you can't have any sinning friends. I'm not saying you can't witness to people and you're going to work with sinners and people who don't believe in God. That's fine. But when we're standing in their path, when we're watching what they do almost longingly, like Lot's wife looking back on Sodom and Gomorrah with aching in her heart of all that she's missing, you will soon be swept along. In fact, if you remember the story of Lot, we did this months ago. I don't even know how many months ago, but we did the story of Abraham and Lot. And Abraham and Lot are both living in the promised land. That's when God first gives it to them, and things are going great. Things are going so great, in fact, that they have so much stuff that they're bumping into each other. All their servants are fighting. Boy, when you've got so many servants that are fighting, you're in a good place. Right? God has blessed you. He says, this isn't good. We're family. We shouldn't be fighting. He says, I'll tell you what, there are miles and miles of land here. You pick wherever you want to go, and wherever you go, I'll go the opposite direction. So we can separate and we won't have all these fights, right? And Lot looks around. He sees in the distance the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, we know those names, right? They knew those names too. They were famous. It's like Las Vegas is rated G compared to what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so he looked there and he saw the lights and he heard the music and he's like, you know what? I want to go live there. Not in Sodom and Gomorrah, of course. No, I'm a good Jew. I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to get close so I can keep an eye on them. So he does. And in fact, that chapter ends. He goes to Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham, like he says, goes the other way and builds an altar to start praying to God. And what happens to Lot, at the very end of that chapter, it says, he pitched his tent facing Sodom and Gomorrah. So he went as far as he could, right to the outskirts of town, and he pitched his tent. So every day he gets to open up his flaps and sit up and stretch and go, I wonder what those perverts in Sodom and Gomorrah are up to. And he could see them. You turn the page in your Bible, the next page, Lot's sitting in the gates of Sodom and Gomorrah. And eventually God's going to send an angel in there to save him. This is what happens, right? It starts pulling us in. When you're standing in the path of sinners, they will pull you straight into Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's what you'll find yourself in the midst of. So then the last thing he says is also interesting. He says, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. Don't listen to the advice of the ungodly. Don't stand where the sinners are trotting. And don't sit in the seat of the scornful. Now, who's the seat of the scornful? Oh, we all know them. They're the cool kids in school. That's the cool table and lunch thing. They sit there and make fun of everybody else. And they grow up and they become adults on Twitter. making fun of everybody else. That's who they are. We know these people. We may be these people. We sit around and we judge others. Christians do this. We don't call it judgment, of course. We call it paying attention to ungodly ways. But look, it's just looking at people and say, look at them. And we make fun of them. We make fun of the phone they have. We make fun of the shoes they're wearing. We make fun of the car they're driving. We make fun of their accents. We make fun of their hairstyles. We make fun of their weight. We make fun of them. We're scornful. And we're sitting there all together, and everybody says, yeah. And you know why? Because as long as we're all making fun of them, no one's making fun of us. This is actually a progression. You start listening to sinning counsel, you end up being pulled along with sins, and as you end up as sinners, what you end up with is with a life that's a dead end. So all you can do to make yourself feel better, because you're not going anywhere, is try to run others down. And that's what the psalmist is saying you can't do. When you get to the point where that's all you're going to do with your life, you're done. You're sitting down in your own squalor, and you're not getting anywhere. So ask yourself who you're sitting with. Look around. Pay attention. Not now you're all sitting with your family. They're okay. I mean the people you sit with when you choose to sit with people. What do? Sit around and make fun of others? Come on. Do we really do this? We do. I do. I've had to watch my tongue. I tell you what, preaching's a hard job because the first person gets the sermon's me. I hate that part. But anyway, mockers are just people who have miserable lives and they gave up. Seriously. That's really when you sit around, there's always that wisecracking friend. They are not happy. I have never met a happy mocker. I've met a lot of them who deride things and they wisecrack and sarcastic and stuff. They're not happy. If you really get to talk to them, you listen. Some of these comedians like David Letterman, he's kind of famous for his sarcastic wit. He loathes himself. He's not happy. It's amazing listening to him. All these. No one's happy when they're doing that. They're doing that because they're not happy. All right, but this is actually the path of least resistance. The easiest way to get there is exactly doing this. If you don't fight against it, this is what will happen. You'll listen to sinners, you'll walk with sinners, and you'll sit in the table of the mockers. That's what happens. And Jesus was kind of warning you about that. He says this. He says, look, you need to enter God's kingdom through a narrow gate. Understand that. There's a big kingdom and everything. There's this little tiny gate. That's God's kingdom. That's his gate. That's how to get into God's kingdom. Now, the gate is large and the road is wide. Over there, if you look over there, you'll see a really wide road leading a really wide gate. He said, but that one leads to ruin. He's actually just saying what the proverb said, right? There's a way that seems right to the man, but that way leads to death. And Jesus is saying the same thing. See that path, the big broad path with a big road and a big gate? That's ruin. What you're looking for is a little tiny narrow thing with a little tiny gate. And here's the good news. There's no line at that gate because very few find it. That's what Jesus is saying. So if you're looking for the easy path, Christianity is not your religion. I'm telling you right now. We serve a blue-collar Christian, blue-collar Savior. I mean, guy worked for a living. This is not the easy path. It's not easy being a Christian. I hate preachers who try to tell you it's easy and it's blessed and it's all good. No, he says you're going to make choices in your life that are going to take you off of the road of least resistance and onto the road of resistance. So basically, so far in this Psalm 1, he's told us everything not to do. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. What's wrong with Christianity? Can't we ever have any fun? Why is it always saying don't? Well, you have to understand, and I think most of us do, is that the journey to righteousness begins when we learn to say no to the world. That's the beginning of it. As long as you keep saying yes to the world, you ain't getting anywhere on this narrow path that Jesus is talking about. But we know this because we know that self-denial is the key to strength. Take it out of Christian context for a while. Just look at some of the motivational stuff on Facebook, right? A better body starts here in the kitchen. You can get fit, but you don't get where you want to go unless you start saying no to some of the things that none of us want to say no to. I've had to say no to caffeine in my life. Mornings got tough. I'm supposed to be saying no to sugar. Here I am passing out M&Ms. Not doing so good on that one. We're supposed to be saying no to stuff. I don't know if anybody ever saw the video. I should probably pull it up. Oops, sorry. Sidney Crosby did a video for NHL several years ago when he was the number one superstar in the NHL. And basically he outlined all the things in his life that he didn't do because he was into hockey. He didn't go to prom. He actually hardly ever got to date. And he didn't even go to his own graduation, which I know you guys in 2020, yeah, welcome to our world. But he didn't even get to go to his own graduation because he was too busy working out with hockey. But what he did was become the greatest player of his generation. But he got there through self-denial. And if you look at any superstar, Michael Jordan or anybody you admire, or any singer that's really good, a really great guitarist or whatever, you look at their lives, they have said no to many things so they could say yes to the things that matter to them. Self-denial is the key to all of this, which is why that's where the psalmist says it starts out. Okay, so that's where we are. But if we continue to say yes to the things we shouldn't say, like if I keep eating M&Ms, I can go to the gym all day long. I don't go to the gym any day. But if I did, it'd make no difference. If I just keep eating all the sugar, I'd be in trouble. My diabetes actually runs in my family. There's no protection, no amount of weights I can do, no number of miles I could run, which would protect my heart from the sugar if I keep eating it, right? If we keep saying yes to things we shouldn't, it doesn't matter what all you're doing. You're never going to get better. And we kind of need to know that, right? Because that's part of this. So let me ask you this. If you feel spiritual weak on Sunday, it might be because you've been saying yes to the devil all week. A lot of times our weakness is our own fault. We can't seem to bring ourselves to stop eating the devil's sugar. And it takes us there. Okay, so that's what we shouldn't do. What should we do? Oh, you're going to love this. This is the great part. Here's what you should do. You should delight in the law. Oh boy, doesn't that sound fun? But this is David writing now. He's saying, you should delight in the law of the Lord. And in his law, he meditates day and night. Day and night, he says. I meditate on God's law. Remember now, this is David talking. He has Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's all he has. That's the law. 5 books. I don't know a single soul except my wife who even likes Leviticus. She loves it. This is what David's saying. I meditate on his law all the time. I always am doing that. And one of the I don't have it in here. I can't believe I don't have it in here, but I don't have it in here, the scripture reference. One of the most misquoted scriptures in the Bible is in Proverbs. And what people quote it as is this. You've probably heard it. Without vision, the people perish. Have you ever heard that? That's not what the verse says. For some reason, I don't understand why, the old King James Version translated it that way, but that's not what the verse says. If you look at the actual Hebrew there, the modern translations have it right. It says, without the prophetic word of the Lord, or prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. And that's really what David's saying here too. If you don't have the word of the Lord with you, then you're not going to believe all that other stuff matters. If God doesn't speak in your life, it's going to be impossible to follow his law. Why would you? If it's a book that's sitting on a shelf that you've never read, how are you going to know what to do? Where are you going to get your encouragement? How's God going to speak to your heart and change you? We just keep that book shut. And I have one, but I never read it. I said, no. And the word that he uses here for meditate is very interesting. Meditate, if you break down into the Hebrew base word, this word for meditate comes from the base word, the sound a sheep makes when it's chewing its cud. Now, I don't know if any of you make noise when you have food. I have some in my life that does. And boy, does she love food. When she gets food, and it's really weird. There's one time when we were still in Washington, D.C., my friend Ed Hinchy comes to this church. He came down to visit us. And Ed grew up like not eating anything except meat and potatoes. Like, that was it. He had pancakes for his first time in his life when he came to my house. It was like in high school. And so he never ate. So I always thought he had a very, very limited diet. But of course, people grow and they change a little bit. So he comes into town. He says, oh, let's get together. Let's go out to eat. My treat. I'm on business expense. Why don't you and Victoria join me? We'll go eat. And I asked him where he was, and he told me, and I Googled it, and I'm looking at restaurants around that area. He goes, well, I said, there's a couple. There's supposed to be a good sushi restaurant there, but I know you don't do that. He goes, I love sushi. So you love sushi? I said, yeah, I love sushi. That's what Victoria loves, sushi. And at the time, I really didn't. And so we went to this restaurant. And so they ordered this platter between them. And it was massive. It looked like a shield off of a Spartan movie. It was this huge circular platter. And it just was circled with these samples of sushi and sashimi, and like this thing comes down the plate, and they're like, oh. And I ordered, I think, some chicken. I'm sitting there, and they're eating this, and it's like they're both doing it. This is so good. I'm like, I want what they're having. What's this chicken about? And they're both of them. It's like I'm with two cattle lowing. It was amazing to me, right? But this is what the psalmist's word means when he says meditate. You speak the word out loud. You read it. You read it over, and you start thinking about it. And like, I see what God's saying. This coming out of his mouth. That's kind of the meditation, right? It's not this mindless chanting that they do in like Hare Krishna or something. This is meditating on the word, right? So you actually are consuming it. And it's like becoming part of you, and you're tasting it. And you're just loving it. So so where's all this get us? So we know what not to do, and we're supposed to be meditating and chewing on the word. Where do we get from here? What do we get? Well, then we actually get to the benefits. They're pretty amazing. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that bring forth fruit in its season, and whose leaf will never wither. And whatever he does will prosper. Okay, that part sounds good. I have to say, up till now, but this part, the payoff, is pretty good. Now I want to show you that he says planted, not potted. There's a difference between a planted tree and a potted tree. We have a garden, my wife's pride and joy. And every year we plant cherry tomatoes. Now, the first 2 years we planted the cherry tomatoes, it was like Jack and the Beanstalk in our yard. I should have got a picture of it. No kidding, these cherry tomatoes grew over my head. And you could walk through the garden like this and just be covered by cherry tomatoes. They just grew like nuts. And they went all the way like into October. It was we had cherry tomatoes. We were giving them away to people. We couldn't even keep up. So this year we downsized, and what we did was we have one cherry tomato plant. It'll be plenty for us. And we put it in a pot. And it's like this high. And we've got, 6? I don't know how many. Not many. Not many. Because it's in a pot. You can't grow all the way. When you're in the ground, those roots spread out. I don't know if you knew that, but if you ever see a tree, if it's 40 feet high, guess how wide the roots go? 40 feet. It's as wide underground as it is tall. And so they spread those roots out, and the picture that David is giving us here is this is by a river. It's lucky. It ran its roots out into that river, and it's just sucking it in, right? And it's allowed it to grow high and grow strong. He says, if you can do this, if you can say no to the world, and you can say yes to God's word, this is what you get in return. You will be planted with these thick, deep roots. You will be committed, and you will be strong. No weather is going to shake you. No storm is going to move you. You are going to be strong because you have committed to the Lord, and you have gone deep in the Lord. See, the problem with a lot of us is we're in pots that are moving, and we don't plant ourselves by the word. We don't do that at all. See, roots grow over time. I love the fact he's saying it, he's tree. This isn't corn. Corn comes up and corn goes. This is a tree. It grows over time. Those roots get out there, and when they get settled, it is powerful. But it takes time to do that, which is why you can't be moving it. If you keep uprooting that tree and planting it someplace else and rooting the tree and planting it somewhere else, that tree will die. You need to let it go. You need to let it just really root up. And in fact, Jesus uses a different word for it when he describes it. He says, abide in me. The word abide. Stay. He's saying, stay in me. Stop leaving. Stay. Abide in me, and I'll be in you. A branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in a vine, so neither can you. We want the fruit from God, but we don't want to abide in God. We want to be able to dash in for a moment when we need a prayer answered and then dash back out. Or maybe I just don't feel real good, Lord. I hope that preacher's not going to go on and on and on. I hope it's going to be exciting today because I need an uplifting sermon today. In fact, people decide what they need out of God, and they pick their church accordingly today. Well, I don't know, he's doing that thing on that. I don't like that. What are they doing over there at New Hope? Well, what are they doing over there at Bridge City? What series are they on, right? I know what I need. I'm going to go where I want. I'm going to get that quick little pop, and I'm going to get on with the rest of my day. I just need a little bit of Jesus to get on for the rest of my day. Jesus says, no, you need to stay with me. You need to stay here. You need to stop running away. Stay here. I said this last night. I really think that more than anything else, we want to play hokey pokey with God. Okay, my wife does not know. Stas, you probably don't know what hokey pokey is. Who knows what the hokey pokey is besides these two Ukrainians? Okay. You ever do it? Kid, right? Remember how your hokey pokey goes? You put the left foot in, you take the left foot out, right? You put the left foot in, you shake it all about. Remember that? That's what we do with God. We put our left foot into the Word, we take our left foot out of the Word, we take our left foot in, we shake it about, do the hokey pokey, move on. That's what it's all about. No, Jesus says, you abide in me. Stop this hokey pokey crap. Stay. Stay here. If you abide in me, you'll grow roots. And if you grow roots, I'll be able to have fruit in your life. And fruit is important in your life. And that's the problem. The problem is that we don't want that. Because fruit's okay, God, but that helps other people. What about me? I need help. What I need is more of your power in my life. I need the gifts of the Spirit. Fruit's okay, but I want the gifts of the Spirit because I have a need in my life. I have a financial need. There's someone in my life that's sick. I've got something going on at work or at school. I could use help in my relationship right now. I need help. And you want to talk to me about growing roots so I can have fruit. I don't care about that. What I want is how do I get that faith you talk about that gets all my prayers answered? That's what I want. I want that faith that I can just simply say, I pull it up when I need it. Like Popeye spinach. Can of faith, open it up, eat it. Now I can get my prayers answered and get what I want. And Jesus says, no, it takes a lifetime to build this. In fact, he tells this story in the Bible. He tells it in every one of the Gospels. He says, look, it's like this. I'll give you a picture. This is a picture he's talking about of faith and prayer. It's like, well, okay, Jesus, teach me about faith and prayer. Here it comes. He says there was a guy, he was a judge, and he didn't fear God. He didn't care about man. Well, he's a good guy, right? Really good guy. Sounds like some of our judges. All right. Now, there was a widow in that city, and she came to him saying, get justice for me from my adversary. And let me explain to you what's going on here. They would have known. In those days, widows had no legal rights because all the legal rights were driven by the man. So you had to be in the household of your son or your husband or your father's household in order to have any rights at all. If you needed help, no one would help you. If a judge decided to step in and make a judgment in your favor, that was the only way a widow could get anything done. That's why the Bible's really, really big on taking care of widows and orphans, because they had nobody to take care of them. There's a lot of verses about widows and orphans. So she has to go to the judge, and the judge is like, I don't care. I don't care about people. And she says, get justice for me. But he would not for a while. But afterward, he said within himself, I love Jesus, this inner conversation, though I do not fear God nor regard man, yet because this woman troubles me day and night, I'll help her. Because otherwise she's going to wear me out. So this is Jesus. Okay, he tells this story. And then watch what he ties this back into. This is crazy. That's what it's like with prayer. And then he says, if this unjust just judge who doesn't care about God or man would do this, how much more will my Father in heaven do it? He's telling you, here's how you pray. Stubbornly. Faith is part of being faithful. Another word for faithful, stubborn. Come before my Father and you pray stubbornly, day in and day out. And God will answer. That's wild. But look what he says at the end. He says, when I come back, when the Son of Man returns, I wonder if I'm even going to find faith like that on the earth. I wonder too, how many of us are stubborn? You've got to grow roots to be stubborn. Trees are stubborn, right? Insects are not. They'll hop all about. Okay, so here's why fruit matters. Fruit matters because fruit is what we need to do in order to be blessed. And it says it's going to bring forth fruit in its season. If you go to Jerusalem, there's a map of Jerusalem. I've never been, by the way. Someday I'd like to go. But there's two seas very close to each other, all in the same zone basically. The Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. We've heard about both of them for all our lives. This is a picture of them. Look how big the Dead Sea and how little the Sea of Galilee is, right? But if you go to the Sea of Galilee, you'll see pictures like this. It's gorgeous. Right? There's plants around, flowers blooming. Jesus performed many of his miracles right here. This is what the Sea of Galilee looks like. This is what the Dead Sea looks like. It's barren. It's got so much salt in the Dead Sea, you could actually go out and float in it because the salt buoys you up. You can't sink. It's like gross. It sounds disgusting to me, but there's so much salt in it. But that's what it is. So you've got this barren Dead Sea, and you've got Jerusalem, you've got the Sea of Galilee. They're in the same area. It gets the same amount of rainfall. It gets the same amount of sunlight, all that's the same. The only difference between the Sea of Galilee that has life and the Dead Sea is the Sea of Galilee has an inlet and an outlet, and the Dead Sea only has an inlet. The water has no place to go. Because there's no outlet, it dies. Guess what happens to Christians who don't bear fruit? See, the purpose of Christianity is to bear fruit. We're supposed to receive from God, and we're supposed to give from God. In fact, Jesus told his disciples, freely you received, freely you should give. If you're trying to live a selfish Christian life, it just doesn't work. You're going to die. That's what the psalmist is telling us too. We have to do that. We have to get to there. So then he switches from the metaphor of the tree into an impossibility. He says, the leaf will not wither. This is a picture of a tree in Jerusalem, and leaves are withering. They're not evergreens. He's not talking about pine trees. He's talking about regular trees. But what he's saying is this. If you do this, the difference between you as the tree and the tree you see around you is your leaves will never die. You'll never wither. That's an impossibility in our world, right? We've never seen a tree like that. But he says you will be that kind of a tree because you're getting your nourishment from the river, which is me. I'm the water that'll give you everlasting life. So he's saying if you do that, and we can do that, but we only get that if the Lord strengthens us. Here's a famous verse everybody knows. Some of you may have a coffee mug with this on it. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and never faint. Man, I want that in my life. That sounds great. That's on your coffee mug. You take it as you pop that caffeine in your system. But notice the first verse of this, the first part. Those who wait upon the Lord. Another way I could put that, those who abide in the Lord. See, this promise isn't for everybody. This promise, like almost every one of God's promises, has an if clause. If you wait on me, if you abide in me, if you stubbornly stay where I plant you, then you will mount up like wings of eagles. Then you shall run and not be weary. Then you shall walk and not faint. The blessings of the Lord comes to those who do not let the world influence them, but those who abide in him and shares what he gives them. That's what Psalm 1's telling us, in a nutshell. That'd been a really short sermon if that's all I'd said. That's what it is. That's what he's really saying. Those who abides with them. That's what it takes. The question is, do we want God's blessing in our life or not? Would you all please pray with me? Heavenly Father, we do thank you that you give us clear direction. And forgive us, Lord, for the times we ignore it. We love you, Lord, and we need to abide in you. Teach us how to be stubborn. Like the apostles were stubborn. I believe, therefore I have spoken, and just stay stubborn in you. We want to be those faithful few who are there when you return, and you can commend our faithfulness. Let us stop running about, but let us stay where